All right, welcome everyone for another very good training. Hopefully, right? So, I'm João Mota, and I'm a pastor and corporate educator. And today we're going to talk about feedback. But before that, let me pray for this training. Let me pray for your life. So we have a wonderful training together. Dear Father, thank you so much for this opportunity for us to learn more about this powerful tool that is feedback. Lord, help us use it in every environment that we are, at our professional work life, but also at church, Lord, because so many times it's so important to listen to people talking to us about moments that we are wrong and we need to correct, but also, Lord, in moments that we are right and we need to understand the path that we need to move forward. Thank you so much, Lord, for this opportunity. Keep the internet connection in your hands, Lord, so this works until we have the final moment together, Lord. Thank you so much. In the name of Jesus, amen. All right. So, welcome, everybody. This is feedback. Actually, the name of this training is strategic feedback for results. I'm going to talk about in a while why strategic is in the name of this training. And it's an important perspective. I'm going to tell you about it in a while. But there is a lot to talk about feedback. So we are going to focus on a model called SAE, the letters SAE, as a model of feedback that I'm going to use on this training. Okay? So let's get started without further ado. Let me just get ready here. I do everything alone on this training. So I know the live transmission. So I have a couple of screens here and I need to adjust myself and see if everything is working well on YouTube and on my screens here. So thank you for your patience. All right. Okay. So so moving forward here, the content that we are going to see today are mainly four aspects. So the first of all, and that's the strategic part that I mentioned to you, we're going to talk about the results. So it's very important to understand that feedback, it's not only a tool to criticize people, but actually it's a tool for us to grow. That's the strategic piece. And there is a number of other results besides learning, which is very good, of course, but there is a lot of other results, especially when you're in a company and not only as the employee, but this is a very powerful tool for leadership. And we're going to talk about it also. We're also going to see the types of feedback, some good practices, and who should give feedback. I bet that you have asked this question. I'm not a leader, so should I provide feedback to other people? Should I provide feedback to my manager? Keep thinking about that question. I'm going to go back to that. And also, of course, you're going to see the SAE model, which is probably the heart of this training. And the good thing about being here with you is to bring some examples. You're going to see that the SAE model is very simple to understand, but mainly that still many people have a few issues, and the examples bring that to reality. Okay, and then we're going to have a practice. I mean, we're not going to be able to practice together, but I'm going to leave you as an exercise for you to take on later in order to put into practice what we have learned here today. And of course, we're going to go through a revision, and then we're going to close the learning today. Okay. I'm also going to answer a few questions either on chat or in the comments later. After this training is live, it's going to be on the same link. So you can send your questions also in the comments. You can put your questions also in the comments. I answer to all of them. And as an opportunity to practice feedback and the SAE model, please send me your feedback in the SAE model about this training. and for a practice for you, but also because we're going to see how important it is for us to receive feedback from other people. So we're going to begin talking about the results of strategic feedback and how much important it is to have feedback for results. Have that in mind. So the first one is that feedback builds trust. We're going to talk about how important it is to be transparent. And there is a level of transparency, or I'm going to say a level, but a correct way of using transparency. I love the word candor, you know, and how important that is for any relationship. So that's the second piece, allowing candor. And of course, you're going to see that all the results, they have a connection between them, because if you have candor, you're going to be able to trust each other. If you have a candor with another person, you're going to be able to trust each other more. And this accelerates execution. And what I mean by that is that when you provide feedback to somebody else and they need to correct their work somehow, and that is impacting your work, which is, of course, very common in any workplace, at church as well. When you provide feedback to somebody, you don't keep that silence that, I hope that person understand. In church environment, that's very common, right? You go to your prayer room and then you start praying for somebody, right? So they can correct them and see how they are, getting into the way of something that you're doing. But then you need to act, right? And that's the part of feedback, acting upon something that, maybe God talking to you to go to that person and provide them a feedback. And that increases productivity, right? Because if you are improving execution, you're definitely going to have more productivity. And of course, with productivity, you have high performance. And if you have participated in my PED training, I talk a lot about the performance and how important it is performance to connect with the results. But before those results, what is important is the action. It's the execution that I'm talking about here also. And the sixth result is to strengthen relationships. So I'm talking about candor. I'm talking about trust. I'm talking about also these three elements here that improve relationships. So it's kind of a result from the results, right? And then of course you have improved work climate in general terms, right? We also work at church serving as ministers as well. And the eighth and last one is that this drives engagement. So when we talk about work climate, of course, we are talking about, feeling well at the place that you work, but that doesn't mean that you are engaged. So that's why high performance is here, because high performance is actually a result of engagement and the connection with the goals that have been set for you by the organization, or even you yourself have goals set in your organization, in your ministry. So first of all, I want to start with this the sentence, this quote from Bill Gates. You might not be fond of him, but he's saying something very wise here. We all need people to give us feedback. This is the way we grow. And actually, he's very right here. And especially because I mentioned that when we receive feedback from somebody, it helps us see something that we might not be seeing, or we may even be in doubt about it. And somebody else talking to us about that specific topic or something that we need to correct is, of course, a way for us to grow, right? So, what is exactly strategic feedback? So, we talk about feedback. Perhaps you don't realize many countries that don't speak English, like Brazil, for example, which is my case, we use the word feedback, right? I love some countries that speak Spanish and they don't translate the word feedback. It's retroalimentación, which is very interesting because it brings the same meaning, or close to the same meaning as in English. But let's go for the meaning in English. So when we talk about feed, is nurturing. So when you feed somebody, feedback is something you provide to somebody else, and that is we use a term in English, right? Like food for thought, and that's the nurture part. You're providing nutrients to somebody, and so they'll be able to grow, right? That's the grow part that we talked before. And of course, feedback comes first, and then you have back. So back is not facing your back to somebody else, but it's actually about return, like Back to the Future, for example. I love that movie. So it's like returning. So you see something and you return back to that person, or you are treated by that person, or you have a relationship with that person, and then you provide food. So, and I guess that this is the very important aspect. So, my question is, when you provide feedback, are you providing food or trash? Right? I know that's a little bit uh, extremist to say, right? But that's for you to understand the difference between feedbacks that we have, right? I'm putting quotation mark here in the end for feedbacks because I believe, this is my belief, that not everything that we call feedback is feedback. And the main aspects of that is because the first thing is that feedback is information. Okay, we're going to talk about the bad side of providing opinion. So we we provide to people, when we are talking about feedback, we provide people with information. Opinion is a sort of information, but so many times information is what? Biased. And that's the bad part of feedback. I'm not one of those people that says that bias needs to be eliminated. But the first point about the bias and not to influence, especially on feedback, is that you go to information, precise information, especially about, of course, the action that the person is taking, but also the consequences. We're going to talk about this, and the SAE model brings a lot of clarity to this. The second aspect is that feedback giver, we talk about this when we talk about feed, right? The feedback needs to have a supportive intention. So I always say this about the feedback giver needing to have, before providing a feedback, they need to have like a moment of reflection. Why am I doing this? Why am I providing feedback? When you go to that reflection piece, so many times is, I'm actually a little bit apprehensive on the response of the other person when I provide them feedback. And I totally understand that. But so many times that there is that impulsive feedback. And the impulsive feedback may be very bad for the relationship so many times, because it's going to be what? Biased. It's going to be based on opinion. And so many times that's not the truth. And the important piece of feedback is the truth. It's not how you see it. That's one point. That's opinion. I'm not saying that opinion is bad. But that's one point. That's how you view it. The other piece is, it doesn't matter if you view it. It's actually what's out there. I like to use the example of the thermometer, right? So when you measure the temperature of someone or the room, what does the room say? The room temperature says, right? I know that in US you use Fahrenheit, right? So, but let me use centigrades because most countries use that. So for us, let's say that 25 centigrades, that's probably about 90, I guess. I don't know, Fahrenheit, but it's close to that. 25 centigrades is like a good environment, right? But if it is good or bad, that's based on my assessment. The thermometer says what? 25 degrees. And that's the truth, right? And then you have the consequence, and we're going to talk about it. So one of the consequences is, for example, water. What happens to water when it's 25 degrees? It is liquid, right? So that's the truth. It's not an opinion. It is what happens. And then you have, when you go to 0 degree, what happens to the water? It actually freezes, right? It becomes ice. And then you have, of course, the boiling point, and etc. But what I'm trying to bring is that consequences are not based on opinion. We are going to talk about feedback based on how you feel. That's also something that is based on information. We're going to talk about it in a while. And the third aspect is the well delivered feedback. I love saying this because it's never negative. I'm going to use negative as a term for, the two types of feedback that we have. But I like using also the word constructive. Constructive feedback, because constructive is also positive. So I'm not saying that negative is not something that people perceive it, right? Because I'm correcting somebody, or that person made something bad for me, so I need to provide them feedback. But the aspect of constructive, it has everything to do with the good intention, the supportive intention to help people grow. Okay? So, what are the types of feedback? I mean, this is very well known. We have the negative feedback, and that's what I mentioned before, that I like calling it the constructive feedback, that you have the intention to support or encourage learning. So that's the moment of reflection that I mentioned before. The most common feedback type is, of course, the negative one, but the less intention on the negative is the supportive intention. Of course, this is again my opinion, but actually, this is what I see, and probably most of you are going to agree with me. And what is the second type of feedback that we know? What is the other most common type of feedback? Or better yet, it's not so common and it should be. It's the positive feedback. And mind you, that something very important to notice is that so many times we don't give much positive feedback, right? And when we do, we just provide like a compliment. And it's not just a compliment, it's more than a compliment. It's to reinforce that the person is on the right path. We're going to see some examples, but a pat in the back is not enough. It's not feedback. It's a compliment. It's good, right? It is good for the ego, right? It helps us with our self confidence. But if you only give a pat on the back, it is going to be less and less valuable, especially related to the same thing. Okay, we're going to talk about how to provide a good positive feedback in a while. So let's talk about good practices first, and it helps us to bring that setting of the SAE model. Okay, so the first piece of it that I want to mention is that, of course, the that we have negative and positive feedback. I see a lot of people debating about the negative feedback, right? But they are not as worried for the positive feedback. Of course, we prefer to provide good news than bad news, right? Don't kill the messenger, we say, right? And but that's also the point of being able to provide good negative feedback. I'm going to call negative, okay? Because it's the most common one. Um, the good thing about providing a good negative feedback is that you are not able to control what the other person is, how the other person is going to react. But you are able to provide a better feedback, a good feedback that is going to reduce the risk of a bad reaction. Okay? And for the time being, I mean, as you practice this with the other person frequently, of course, give you enough time for them to breathe or something like that. So like, don't do it like every hour. They're going to feel very much criticized, but even if it is a good feedback, but if you do it frequently with a good adjustment, with a good setting, with a good heart, with the intention to help that person grow, that's when you provide a good feedback, even though being negative. Okay. The second aspect is, and I see a lot of people making this mistake. So many times I see people providing public feedback, and that never can happen, even positive. Okay. for a couple of reasons. The negative feedback we provide in public, I've seen a lot of leaders say this. I asked some leaders and say, why did you provide the negative feedback at a meeting, right? And so many times they don't call, people by their names, like saying, providing the feedback and naming the feedback who's going to receive. I see some people doing that, unfortunately, and that's even worse than being public. Actually, that's public, but you're exposing that person, and that's embarrassing, very much embarrassing, even using the SAE model. Okay. But the aspect of providing feedback and what I said I see very commonly done is a leader providing like a general feedback and saying that that is an example for the rest of the team. And why do I say this is not good and this can affect negative, not because of the feedback, but negative in terms of engagement and many other negative aspects? Is that so if it is every single one of the employees, which I think is probably less than 1% of the cases, I would say it's okay, but I really don't encourage that because every person receives feedback differently. Then again, doing that, most cases, I would say the majority of cases is when there is a few people, usually the least part of the group, right? If you have a team of 10 people, that's probably 2 or 3 people you're providing feedback. So the other 7 are going to be confused. Is my manager talking about me as well? Did I do something that I shouldn't? I didn't do that. What he's talking. So many questions that are a fruit of that confusion that brings. Once I received, actually not once, but so many times from different managers. I participated in meetings and they provided this public negative feedback. And actually, I most of the times I go back to the manager and say, hey, was it me that we were talking about? And then he, many times it's a he or a she, but anyway, and then he came back to me and said, no, don't worry about it. It's not about you. And I said, well, but if it is not about me, why didn't you go to the other people? And that's the response that they give me because it's an example for the other people. And then I asked them, what about the rest of them? Is it only me that is not practicing that? And he said, no, it's just a few of people of the team. So the others are going to be confused as well. So my question is, why didn't you go to each individual? Right? And that's the point. That's why the feedback needs to be private, not only to not expose the person who is receiving the feedback, or if it is directly or if not, but to leave out that confusion. Another good practice is what I call the third party feedback. And you should be direct. Okay. So the delegated feedback is when you go to a manager and you say, let's call John. So John is not keeping the deadlines, and I need you to talk to John, which is fair. It happens so often. But on the other point is, gossip when you are transmitting a message that you received. And so many times it may be a fourth party or a fifth party feedback, which gets even worse. So I really encourage people to provide direct feedback. And of course, there are many aspects around providing direct feedback, about providing direct feedback. But the point is, the majority of times that you need to provide direct feedback, not saying to somebody about somebody else. That's gossip. You shouldn't do that. The second part is what I mentioned before. You should keep off opinion and focus on facts and data. Okay. That doesn't mean leaving opinion completely out, but as much as you can, because opinions are different. People have, each of them have their different opinions, but facts and data are incontestable. So that's the point. You're not providing how you see the facts, you're providing the actual facts and the data. Second one is what I mentioned before about reflecting. So many times I see people giving feedback, loaded, nervous, when they can't stand anymore the other person. And that's bad because then the feedback is going to be loaded with sentiment. The other person is either going to be shy, or get back to you when they're providing that kind of feedback. And that's why I say that feedback needs to be neutral. If you provide a positive feedback, of course, having a smile on a face, that always helps. But being neutral in every time helps the people focus on the facts and the data and not on you. Because so many times when somebody provides a positive feedback to us, we tend to like that other person. And the opposite is also true. When we receive a negative feedback, what happens to us? Oh, I don't like that person because he only provides negative feedback. Isn't that so? And that's the point also. If you're neutral, the chances of the other person reacting loaded again reduce very much. The other aspect also is to put the people against the wall when you provide negative feedback, and them being low. If you provide that feedback loaded, emotionally loaded, it's not going to be good. It may even go to a harassment piece, which is even worse than a negative feedback, right? Another aspect also that I see a lot of people doing wrong is that feedback is not punitive. It is not a correction in the sense of you need to change this, or you're being late for like 4 months and 4 times this week, and it's an aspect of the negative again. So you cannot use feedback to punish other people. Before that, of course, as a leader, so many times, you have to lay people off, or you have to dismiss them. If it is in church, you have to dismiss them from a certain ministry, but that's only after several, or at least a few feedback have been provided to that person. Okay. So feedback needs to be supportive. We talked about this, how important it is. And the supportive piece is on the mind and the heart of whoever is providing that feedback. And also, a very important aspect, this is the last one. I see a lot of people, because they're hesitant to provide negative feedback, that they rumble. They talk about, how you feeling today? Yeah, good. Did you watch the game yesterday? And they're like, nah, nah, da, da, da. Talk a lot about, and then the other person is like, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. They get even more apprehensive. So go to the point. If it is a feedback session, I always encourage people, especially when you're getting used to the SAE model, if you schedule a session, or if you meet that person, if it is not a very drastic feedback, it may be like occasional, right? But you cannot go, like rambling. I always encourage that it's not a part of a bigger meeting. It is a feedback session. It doesn't have, feedback, it needs to be frequent. We're going to talk about this. So it doesn't have to be like, not even 10 minutes. I would say that like 5 minutes, one feedback, of course. Of course, you have feedback sessions after the fiscal year has been over, or in the middle of the year, like a revision. That's the official feedback sessions, right? But I'm talking about frequent feedback, and that has to happen. It is quick. It is very fast. It's not really a conversation. That doesn't mean you don't have to listen to the other person, but it's not an extended conversation, right? And that's the assertive piece of feedback. If it doesn't take much time to provide, and even a small conversation generated from that feedback, you can provide it more often. If it is like a 1 hour session, it's going to take more time, and you're going to want to do it less for a number of reasons. Okay? So let's go for another question that people often ask me, who should provide feedback, right? So there is the deliberate and there is the offer. right? Who has sort of like the obligation to provide feedback? And of course, I'm talking about leaders, and I'm talking about the frequency here also, to provide that sort of habit of providing feedback, and of course for the other person to understand that they receive feedback frequently. And of course, again, the first point of the best practice is provide both types of feedback. Don't use that sandwich philosophy of feedback. You may know this. Actually, this began in the 80s probably, and doesn't work at all. It didn't work back then, and it doesn't work today. Like, what is the sandwich, right? It's like a bun and a filling in the middle, right? Like I don't know, like a burger, for example. So you have a bun in the beginning and a bun in the end. So what's that? The positive feedback. The buns are positive, right? So first positive feedback, and then a negative one, and then a positive one. Why that's bad? It makes people confused because usually people don't have good things to say about somebody else. They have more bad things to say about somebody else. So they start making up positive feedback to be the buns. And and that's a bad piece. So I remember a boss that I had at the beginning of my career that he was used to providing the sandwich feedback. So he always came with a positive one, a negative one, and then a positive again. And then I noticed that the third time he did this, it was always like the positive ones were like something like, you always get here on time. That's not a feedback. I mean, that's kind of my obligation, right? To get to the company on time. And it wasn't even a compliment. So it begins to go into that commonplace that doesn't really make sense and it's not valuable. You see that the person is making like check marks and not really adding to your growth opportunity. Then again, you have another aspect that you need to provide feedback is when the other person is having a negative impact on your work or the relationship. Okay, on your work is when somebody is not keeping the deadline. It doesn't have to be your manager. It may be a peer. It may be somebody from another area, another department, and they are not contributing to the work. And it's usually most of the times because you don't work by yourself, especially if you're in a company. It doesn't have to be a big one, but you have your part and it's intimately connected to the other person. That's why it's called organization. It comes from organ, like organism of the body. And, it's like saying to the hand, I don't need you, being an eye. I don't need you. But when you need to scratch your eye, you need to use your hand. When you need to look at something, like this cup over here, you need your hand to pick it up, but you need your eyes to see where it is exactly. So that's the point. On the relationship piece is also very important, especially negative, because the person may be affecting your emotional side, maybe offending you somehow. And that's when I say to people, you need to provide a feedback to that other person. It doesn't mean that you need to work on your relationship. It's not that piece because so many times you don't need to have an intimate, not even a close relationship with your peers. You're not obligated to do that, right? It's a work relationship. But whenever that is impacting you emotionally, that's when you need to provide feedback. Like, I don't feel well. We're going to talk about how to do the relationship or the emotional feedback sort of thing, but the correct one, not the loaded one. We're going to talk about it's more focused on you, how you feel, how something that the person did, not really how if it is right or wrong, but how that action made you feel. That's the consequence. But we're going to talk about it. And all the rest, of course, you provide feedback, but you ask for it and you know only the person accepts it, right? So there is that a common question is, can I provide you a feedback? So people are all, most of the times they're going to respond yes, because it's a can question. So what I always do is that, especially on closing a deal or after a meeting, uh, that of course doesn't impact my work or the relationship that I have with that person. Like for example, if somebody do a presentation and some numbers are off, right? If they don't have much impact, and or if it is like a misspelling error or something like that, I asked the person, if you want my feedback about your presentation, feel free to ask me. So that's different. That's a different question. It doesn't pressure the other person. It makes them, then I think I'm going to look for Joao later on and ask his feedback. What did I do wrong? Because there is the respect part. So you usually want to or receive a feedback from somebody you respect. I'm not saying that you don't respect your peers, but you are expecting a feedback from your leader. You're not expecting a feedback from your peer. That's why I say that this is the least used feedback. People don't provide feedback when they're impacting your work or your relationship. And that's the piece you need to provide feedback. But then, if it is not any of these cases, you need to ask, not pressure, but leave that door open to provide feedback to the other person. Okay, so let's go for the SAE model. As I mentioned before, it's an acronym which means situation, action, and effect. So every feedback needs to have these three pieces. So the situation is where and when. It is always connected to an action. Then that's the second piece. What took place or should have. Where and when positions the person into the conversation, into the feedback that you're providing them. That's a very important piece because people take it for granted, right? And also they don't localize, they don't bring the situation to the perspective. And we're going to talk about people using always, never, those eternal words that are useless in a feedback. And then, of course, there is the action and what exactly took place or should have. There's the action and the no action I like talking about. So something that should have happened and was and didn't. Okay. And the third one, a very, very important piece, but unfortunately left out, is what are the consequences? And the consequences is actually where the person who receives the feedback is going to realize that their action wasn't good or it is. Okay? If it is a mistake, if it is not. You don't need to do the effect yourself, like saying, this was not good, that didn't work, something like that. Because again, that's opinion. The opinion is going to be on the action and the effect, but mostly on the effect. And the effect is also something based on data. Okay, let's see some examples, and this is going to be clear now. So let's go for this particular feedback. So 2 days ago, when returning from lunch, you provided corrective feedback about your colleague's imprudent conduct. Sorry. That action prevented an accident and reinforced the company's security policies. Okay? You see, first of all, feedback is not a long sentence. Remember, rubbling, it is direct, it is assertive, but everything is here. The situation 2 days ago when returning from lunch. So it was very specific. The thing about the situation, you may think that it is obvious for the other person, but so many times you have to name the obvious because you need to centralize that person. You don't know what's going on in their mind. Usually when you provide a feedback to somebody, that's already in your mind for a while, but the other person doesn't have that in mind. But when providing feedback, you need to have that kind of rapport, and the situation is that rapport, or at least increases the chance of establishing rapport to the other person, with the other person. And then you have, of course, the action. You provided corrective feedback about your colleague's imprudent conduct. So if you stick here in the action, you're gonna say, was it good or not? Was it, I did provide imagine yourself receiving that feedback. Yes, I did. I provided a corrective feedback, to my colleague. And I don't know, did I do it wrong? Did I do correctly? And then you have, of course, the effect. That action prevented an accident and reinforced the company's security policies. You could add a congratulations after this, but it may not even be necessary because the let's say it's the manager, or even a colleague here, they're providing, the effect with data. Like, what did it do? What was the precise effect? So prevented an accident. So perhaps this colleague was, like looking at the cell phone while walking, inside a factory. You cannot do that. I mean, you shouldn't do that anywhere. But anyway, and that reinforced the company's policy. So I think that every company that I worked, especially, after mobile became a thing, they always had this policy that you cannot walk inside the company, at least using your mobile, looking at your mobile. It's like driving and texting. It, it's impossible to do that. So that's the point. The positive action and a positive feedback. The positive effect is actually the sort of like the denominator, right? The quality or the characteristic of a positive feedback. And of course, as I mentioned, you could add something after this. Congratulations. You could start a conversation on, you know, how that made you feel. Was it hard for you to do it? Like coaching the other person. And excuse me, I'm talking a lot, so I need to drink. And this is water, by the way. So let's go for another example. Yesterday at the department's meeting, your presentation showed inaccurate numbers. Remember, that was kind of the example I'm giving here. And then some people contested it, which undermines credibility and work perception. So, okay, you already noticed this is the situation yesterday at the department's meeting. So it could be, if you say just yesterday, you know, like working 8 or 9 hours inside the office. Okay, when exactly? As I mentioned, we are building rapport. We are making that person pay attention to what we are saying. Usually, if you start this before the situation, say I'm going to provide you a feedback, they're going to be scared, right? And so many times I don't name it a feedback. I just say that let me talk let's talk, right? Let me say something to you. Let me, provide an advice or something like that. To, unload unload the word feedback. So many times just the word is already loaded. It's a feedback. The other person also realizes it's a feedback after that, but you don't need to name it feedback. Okay. And then you have, of course, over here the action. Where's my mouse? Oh, it's here. Okay, then you have the action, and then you have, of course, the effect, which is some people contested it. So, can you see the harm in just, like finishing the feedback over here, right? Not continuing, just the situation and the action, right? Yesterday, the department's media presentation showed inaccurate numbers, period, right? There are some people who do that, right? I already provided feedback to that other person. And then my question usually is, did they understand? And they say, yeah, they should. They should, because that's like common knowledge. And I always say that common knowledge is common only if you affirms or when you validate your affirmation with the other person. And it's not only asking, did you understand? So many times is, may ask questions, but to deep down the understanding of the other person, not pressuring them against the wall. Like, did you understand? That's a yes and no question. We're going to talk about In the future, I have a train called building relationships, and I talk about asking questions. And one of the aspects of asking questions is if they are open, they are better than closed questions, which is like yes or no, or alternative questions, for example. And then, of course, you have the effect here. So some people contested it, and this is an important piece. Why does it undermine credibility and work perception? This could be an opinion, right? Actually, it is an opinion. But pointing out to something that happened in the meeting, right? It brings credibility to the effect. And this is very important because the person was there, and most likely I would say that yes, the person who's providing feedback was also. They may have heard, so that's why I don't like delegated feedback or third party feedback, because if this manager wasn't there, that other person may contest, may doubt about the feedback and say, "What? Nobody said anything," but they contested to the manager, right? And this is going to infuriate most people. They are not going to receive it well, especially if nobody said anything at the meeting. And I hate when this happens. I know that clients, most of the case are clients, they go to the manager instead of the person. And usually I would say that's not honorable. I'm sorry to use that word, but I'm going to say not honorable. It's like if you go to a restaurant and you receive a bad service and you don't try at least once to talk to the person and make the person understand how bad the service is, right? I'm not going to say that this helps every time, but definitely you need to try it at least once. And then, of course, you raise your hand and say, I need to talk to the manager. So I would say that the delegated feedback has to happen sometimes, but I'm going to say that if you are the feedback giver, try at least provide it once. I know that with clients is difficult, but what I do is that if somebody tells me, well, that's actually Freud, right? If John tells me about Peter, I know more about John than Peter. Have you heard that one? But it's true. So whenever somebody comes to me, especially because I was a manager for so many years, comes to me and talks something about my employee, my first question is, have you talked with them? And a lot of times the person answers to me and say, no, I didn't. So, okay, talk to them. If it doesn't generate any changes, then you come back to me again. Unfortunately, what happens so many times is that they don't. And I had managers who did the same thing. And I just found out, like, by accident, or not, because they, Peter talked to me about you, John. And it's not that, because again, as I mentioned, it's going to seem like gossip, and we don't want that. But anyway, this is what I do, and let's keep going. So it is more about the action than the person. It's very important that you realize this. So it's not about you presented. Of course it is, but as much as you can keep out of the person, but on the behavior, on the result, on the effect, on the presentation, on the action, that's better, because you don't want to judge the person when you're providing feedback. You want to keep distance from that, because again, that's judgmental. All right, so let's go for the other part. I love this because this is funny so many times, right? So let's go for some ineffective feedback. So the first one is during yesterday's meeting. So a little bit like the feedback from before. You left before it was over, and it was nice. I'm putting an example of feedback that I received once. So, but why am I laughing? So, okay, you have the situation good during yesterday's meeting. It could be even more specific. Let's say that there were more than just one meeting, but still, you left it before it was over. That's the action. but this is not an effect. That wasn't nice. So this is, as I mentioned before, this is judging. This is judgmental. And why is it judgmental? Because being nice or not, it is based on the opinion of the other person. As I mentioned, this was my example. So um, I had my daughter at the hospital, and I was at the meeting. So I need to leave because I received a message from my wife to talk with her. And even though I said that to the manager, and he said, "Yeah, but you need to tell me beforehand." You know, uh, the effect on the relationship had happened before. And then he tried to explain why that wasn't nice because everybody noticed that you left and etc. And then I went the second mile, and I asked a friend of mine who was in the room, and he said to me, "John, I didn't even notice." Only the manager noticed, and that was what my friend said to me, and that's the point. That's actually, I'm not going to say offensive, but it definitely affects somewhat the relationship. Let's go for another one. You are always behind on deadlines, which impacts the team's productivity. Okay, so let's go for the first part here. Always. So what is always, right? It is a temporal. It doesn't have really a situation or an action. You're always behind deadline. What that means exactly? So usually this kind of feedback is loaded because it happened already before. It was late, something that it should be on time and it wasn't. So why didn't that person provided feedback before? And then you're going to say, well, but the other person doesn't know that they're behind schedule. Remember what I mentioned before. You need to be obvious sometimes, because if you let it get to this piece that's saying always, it's like forever, since dinosaurs walked the earth, like always, it means that that person never kept deadlines. You see how impactful that is? In it, you may say, "No, Joe, you're exaggerating." Am I? What? How would you feel if you received a feedback like this? You are always late, right? Does it mean that every time you have a day, every time that you have an event, you never go in time? You never get to the event on time? Is that it? And that's the important piece. Remember how we said before to reflect before you go and provide a feedback to the other person. That's the reflection piece. Actually, many times is writing down the feedback. You don't need to read to the other person, but write down the feedback, the words that you're going to use, and reflect on them to see how you would react to those words. And actually, that's the point. You could provide that feedback once, but how many times? Does that mean that, let's say that this person is working for the company like 1 year, so every time every task was late, they could provide, like on this date, that task exactly. So every task that this person do is late. Reflect on that. And which impacts team's productivity. Okay, this is an effect. It's fair to say that this is an effect, but how exactly? We cannot affirm that this conversation ended here, but still, if it did, it should have how the team productivity is affected. Again, you're gonna say to me, this is obvious, but how obvious it is when you receive that feedback? Like, what team? Is that our teams? Is that other teams? Is that any other department? How does that affect exactly? If it is on production, if it is on sales, if it is on finance, how exactly does it affect? Let's go for a few more examples. So you are careless, you'll never meet deadlines. Again, I'm calling it a deadline. I'm stuck on the deadline here. So the never again is like always, right? It's like this eternal word. So being careless or accusing someone of being careless, it is again putting the never and the careless together means that since they were born, they're careless. See the point? You're going to say that, yes, this is semantics, João. So they may react like this, but that's not my intention. Yes, but you need to have your communication as clear as possible and keeping to the precise information. You don't need to go to the seconds, of course, but as much precise as you see fit, you need to be. And then you have again, never meet the deadlines. But what is the action? Never meeting the deadline. Is that really the action? You're always behind, but what exactly? What actions? What task? How many times? And I have another one. Let me go back a bit. I have another training that I talk about how to receive feedback. And as you wish, this is me talking when I received this training, okay? This kind of training. When you are into this training and you don't have your manager there, what is your thought? I wish my manager was here, right? But then you start understanding how it is a good feedback being received, and you start providing good feedback to people. And then we're going to talk about this, the importance of providing feedback to your manager as well. And then we start providing feedback as examples. Of course, you're not going to say, oh, John, this is an example of feedback. Hear me out. Not that point, but they start reflecting, hopefully, on the feedback you're providing them. Let's go for another one. Congratulations, good job. Okay, it is fair to say that we love receiving that. Who doesn't? But again, as I mentioned before, if this goes on and on and on, it loses the effect, right? So what's the situation? What's the action? What's the effect? Remember that I mentioned before that the positive feedback is to know if you're in the right path. So I had situations where a manager or somebody who was providing feedback, they said congratulations to me. And I asked, I'm sorry, but about what? And they said, oh, about your work. Okay, but what? Oh, the training that you did. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. What was the part that you liked the most? So that's a little bit about receiving feedback. The way of receiving feedback is asking questions. And that's helpful for you, what? To grow. So what is the piece that I did right? Into the perspective of that other person. You keep asking questions about the action, about the situation. So again, about this training, for example, if you say this training was good, I'm going to be very happy, but it's not helpful to me. It is helpful if you say, João, when you talk about, for example, ineffective feedback, I totally understood why my feedback needs to improve, right? Okay, again, right? What job exactly? What was the impact? Again, even though this is positive, the impact, the effect needs to be there. I love this quote from George Bernard Shaw. He says that the biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. This means that so many times we provide feedbacks to people, kind of self-assuring that the other person understood your message, because there was a lot of underlying into your conversation, into your feedback. If you don't put the situation, the action, and the effect together in your feedback at a small sentence, you saw it before. It doesn't have to be a big conversation. You cannot guarantee, but you increase the chances that your communication is going to take place. Okay? So let's go for the practice, okay? As I mentioned before, there is a lot of content to talk about feedback, and I'm going to bring here the how to receive feedback piece as well, because this is very much important, not only to listen, but to receive. Because once you start providing, and this happened to me, once you start providing good feedback, you're going to start realizing how bad the other person is providing feedback to you. And usually feedback is not a feedback to feedback conversation. Okay, like I'm going to provide you a feedback and then you provide me a feedback. That usually doesn't help, but that's based on experience actually. So if you're receiving a feedback, keep it, you know, uh, keep it the conversation only by receiving the feedback, and then on another opportunity, you again, if it is not something like intense or very much important, it is not impacting the relationship much, you're not a leader, you ask the person and say, thank you for providing me the feedback, and I have some for you as well. If you're willing to receive, let me know. Like that, keeping the door open. And again, the intention for support is there, right? Okay, so let's go for the practice. I recommend you to prepare and offer positive feedback to two people. Again, using the SAE model, please. Okay. I recommend you to write it down, write the feedback down, the words, perceive how you would understand those words coming to you if it were a feedback that you were receiving. And that's a bit of the scenario how the other person is going to receive the feedback. Okay, so try it with two people, right? And then, of course, I would say that the most important is prepare and offer negative feedback to two people. Okay, two different people. I recommend not be the same people. So I would say that four people. Okay, if you want to go further, right? Don't stick to people you like or dislike. And to start on the negative feedback, I'm going to say don't go for the drastic yet. Go for the minor things. Go for, not something that is impacting your relationship, not something that might be affecting your work somehow. Okay? Then on the negative one, you don't need to offer. You need to, I need to say something to you about we working together. That's, you're not asking, you're saying. But then again, you can do this, the deliberate one, the offering, and then you do like I need to, like once each. Okay. The positive one, you do the same. You just offer. If you want to, you can prepare even more than one, because so many times people don't want to receive feedback. And as I mentioned to you, you don't need to call it a feedback. You need, I need to talk to you about something. Okay, that's it, right? This is actually the negative one. It works very well. I need to talk to you about something. The person is going to voluntarily say yes, right? But again, if you want to make it a real offer and say, hey, I wanted to talk to you about something with you. I have a feedback that I wanted to provide with you, but only if you're willing to receive. Okay, let me know. That's it. That's it. You don't need to go to church, pray 6 hours a day. You don't need to do that. You just need to have a correct mindset. Then let's go for the review. So what we have seen today, we saw the many results, like we saw like 80 results that come from what I mentioned is a strategic feedback, because that's the point. Strategic feedback is about providing results. And then we talked about the types, the good practices, and who should give feedback. Okay. Then we went into the SAE model, which is the situation, the action, and the effect. And we saw some examples of effective and ineffective types of feedback. And then I provide you a practice of feedback, and we are closing to close your learning cycle. Remember that I always say this, watching this video either live or either streaming or the recording, it is going to bring you only information. When you start practicing the SAE model and the good practices and the mindset that I mentioned, is when the learning is going to stick with you. During time, of course, not just one practice. You need to put that into your daily routine. Okay? So let's go for the CQ&A, which is, I always like to put the C in front of Q&A. So I'm going to listen to the comments. So let me go to the chat and see what we have here today. And Okay. So let me go for the questions here. Okay, I have a comment which is I'm going to answer or comment on three comments. Okay, let me go for Mary's. So Mary is saying, I feel embarrassed to provide negative feedback. I'm afraid people will react aggressively. Yes. Um, I'm not saying it's going to be easy using the SAE model, okay, Mary? Definitely, the SAE model, as I mentioned before, it's very helpful and decreases the chances of a negative reaction with your negative feedback. So many times I say that the negative feedback is about the reaction, not what you're providing to the other person. But I mean, you don't control the other person, how they feel. But definitely, if we start small, if we start like being assertive, notice that you're not going to spend more than 5 minutes providing that feedback from before. I would say that even 1 minute. And of course, if there is a questionable, I'd say like a person who questions a lot, it is going to be a challenge. So that's more for, I'm not going to say more, but that's something for my other training that I'm going to bring here about how to receive feedback. But still, um, using the SAE model, not being loaded, writing it down and seeing how you would react if you receive that feedback from the other person is very helpful. And usually, when you start having that fear that Mary is mentioning here, um, is when she cannot stand it anymore, and there is a history of bad reactions by the other person. That's what usually happens. I'm not saying it's your case, Mary. So, in many cases, this might happen, is not a case for feedback. If it is very drastic, if it is close or already a harassment situation, it's not anymore a moment of feedback. Okay. And I didn't mention before, but I'm going to mention now that there is not a feedback for each situation. Okay. It's like, if you go to a restaurant and somebody call you names, I'm not saying specific, but if they curse or something like that to you, it's not a matter of providing feedback, it's a matter of calling the manager. Okay. Feedback is usually something disruptive. It's usually something under the weather, or a deadline that was not met, or a behavior that you notice that it's somewhat impacting you, things like that. And as a manager, any kind of feedback daily. Okay. But when you go to the drastic piece, again, I reinforce this. You need to open a report or talk to that person's manager. That's the case of doing that. It's not a case for feedback. Okay, Mary? So that's one. Let's go for the second one. It's from Jonathan. I don't believe I need to provide so many details to people when I give feedback. People should use common sense. Yes. I don't know when you wrote this, Jonathan, but hopefully it was before I talked about the SAE model. Um, so many times when you are already in a relationship, and I'm saying no, it needs to be a close relationship, but a long relationship, like working for many, I'm not gonna say years, but just months, and feedback is something ordinary into the relationship. I'm gonna say to you, you might not need to provide many details. You can say, in the last meeting during your presentation, there was some wrong numbers there. Period. Right? And because there is trust between you, there is that candor that I mentioned before, but that builds from time. And if you have a strong relationship, and then I'm going to say, even with an intimate person, a strong relationship is based on candor. It's not based on saying what's on your mind, because so many times on our mind, it's trash. What I'm saying is the voluntarity and the supportive intention to the other person. Okay. But Jonathan, I'm going to say to you, if you're starting to provide feedback to that other person, or if you were a manager and you're already providing feedback to your team, I'm going to ask you to ask for feedback about your feedback. Sometimes that's key. How is your feedback? And I'm going to say to you, Jonathan, um, they might not answer instantaneously, like saying, you know, Jonathan, last week, like an SAE feedback for you. They may try to avoid an answer because managers have this, I call it a power position. It may be a strong word, but it is. They manage a team. They not doesn't mean that they own the team, but what does a manager say? My team. It's like owning the team, right? So, but be patient, right? If it is a positive feedback, if they say, "How is my feedback to you?" and they say, "Good," and then you go, "How good?" Again, we're going to talk about this on receiving feedback, but a good way of improving your feedback is also asking people about how your feedback is. Okay? And then the third one is from Michael. So, this is what Michael says. When it's not something serious, I believe giving feedback in public can be a lesson for others. I do this when more than one person on the team behaves poorly and I don't name them. Okay, so he's putting like stress marks on I don't name them. So it's somewhat of what I mentioned before. Of course, you're not exposing the other person. Well, that's the drastic piece. But if it is a lesson to somebody who has never done something, I mean, it's pointless, right? It's like saying to a waiter, "Don't serve me bad," and they never did. It may be even received as an offense. So I again, I don't recommend Michael or anybody else to provide a generalized feedback to people. They need to know how they cannot behave. Sometimes that's needed, like in terms of security, right? Safety, I'm sorry, in terms of safety. That's sometimes what has to happen, but that's not really a feedback, it's a set of rules. So if you're pointing out a set of rules, fine, that's what has to happen. But if it is a feedback, a generalized feedback, and I want everybody to know that this is not acceptable, I don't recommend doing that, right? I recommend you go into each individual how they behaved, and we're going to talk about how to receive feedback. Is that conversation that happened afterwards, it may be your bias. I'm not saying Michael is your case, but it may be bias. Okay? So, if there is any more question, if there is any further questions or comments, please leave it on the comments. This recording is going to be there on my store. You have the QR code over here. On my store, you can have the slides for this session. I want to encourage you to help this ministry, this organization, continue providing this kind of feedback to other people. So go to my store. The link is on the description. Go to my store and purchase. It's going to be very low price. So purchase the slides for this session, and I have also there other development materials like books and other slides as well. Okay. Thank you so much for being here, and I see you next time. Bye bye.